The dust swirled up Main Street like a plague of locusts, coating everything in its path with a fine layer of copper-colored grit. Copper Hollow hadn't seen rain in 3 weeks, and the earth had cracked open like the broken promises of the mining companies that had once sworn this place would make men rich. Now, in the autumn of 1883, the town was little more than a collection of weathered buildings clinging to the edge of nowhere, populated by those too poor or too stubborn to leave. June Walker pressed her face against the grimy window of their one-room shack, watching the world outside turn sepia in the afternoon light. Behind her, the wet, rasping cough of her father punctuated the silence. The smell of stale whiskey and human waste hung heavy in the air, mixing with the ever-present dust that found its way through every crack in the walls. "June!" The voice was barely a whisper, thick with phlegm and self-pity. "June, girl, water?" She turned from the window, her movements mechanical after years of the same routine. Her father, Thomas Walker, lay sprawled on the straw mattress that served as their only bed. Once, he'd been a miner, strong-backed and proud, with hands that could swing a pickaxe for 12 hours straight. Now those same hands trembled as they reached for the tin cup she offered, spilling half the water down his yellowed undershirt. "Easy, Pa," she murmured, steadying his grip. At 22, June had the worn look of someone a decade older. Her dress, patched and repatched until the original fabric was barely visible, hung loose on her thin frame, but her eyes, green as sagebrush after rain, still held a spark of something that poverty hadn't managed to extinguish. A sharp knock rattled their door, making both of them freeze. Visitors meant only one thing in Copper Hollow: trouble. "Miss Walker." The voice belonged to Hiram Maddox, the town's most persistent creditor. "I know you're in there. Your rent's 3 weeks past due." June's stomach clenched. She smoothed her tangled auburn hair and opened the door just wide enough to face him. Maddox stood there in his dusty black suit, ledger in hand, looking like a vulture that had dressed itself in Sunday clothes. "Mr. Maddox, I told you last week. You told me you'd have the money." He interrupted, his small eyes roving over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Well, I don't see any money. What I see is a drunk's daughter playing house in property that belongs to me." Behind her, Thomas tried to sit up, managing only to knock over the water cup. The sound of it clattering on the floor made Maddox peer past her, his nose wrinkling in disgust. "Lord Almighty! Girl, how do you live like this?" "We manage," June said quietly, trying to maintain what little dignity she had left. Maddox leaned closer, his breath hot and sour. "There are ways a pretty thing like you could earn that rent money. Mrs. Colby's boarding house is always looking for housekeepers." Everyone in Copper Hollow knew what kind of housekeeping went on at Mrs. Colby's. June's jaw tightened. "I'll have your money by week's end." "You'd better," Maddox said, stepping back, "or you and that worthless father of yours will be sleeping in the street. Though, from the smell of things, that might be an improvement." He left, and June closed the door, leaning against it as if her slight weight could keep the world at bay. Her father had passed out again, one arm hanging off the mattress, fingers twitching in his sleep, still reaching for a bottle that wasn't there. The larder was empty save for a heel of stale bread and some beans that were more dust than food. June had already sold everything of value: her mother's silver hairbrush, the family Bible, even the wedding ring her father had hidden away in a tin box. All that remained were the clothes on their backs and the stubborn pride that kept her from accepting the kind of help that came with strings attached. She needed work, real work. June washed her face with the last of their clean water, braided her hair as neatly as she could manage, and ventured out into the dusty afternoon. The townspeople watched her pass with the mixture of pity and contempt reserved for those who'd fallen too far to be respectable, but not far enough to be ignored. Women pulled their children closer. Men let their gazes linger just a moment too long. Her first stop was Morrison's General Store. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and Mrs. Morrison looked up from her ledger with a frown that deepened when she recognized June. "I'm not extending any more credit to your family," she said before June could speak. "I'm not asking for credit. Mrs. Morrison, I'm looking for work. I can stock shelves, sweep floors, keep accounts." "I'm sure you can," the older woman interrupted, not unkindly. "But I can't hire the town drunk's daughter. It wouldn't be appropriate. You understand?" June understood all too well. She tried the bakery, the laundry, even the funeral parlor. The answer was always the same, delivered with varying degrees of sympathy or scorn. By the time the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting Copper Hollow in shades of rust and shadow, she had been turned away from every respectable establishment in town, which left only the unrespectable ones. The Silver Fang Saloon squatted at the end of Main Street like a gaudy promise of forgetting. Even in the late afternoon, piano music spilled from its bat-wing doors, mixing with men's laughter and the clink of glasses. June had walked past it 1,000 times, always averting her eyes, always hurrying her steps. Now she stood across the street, watching the doors swing open and closed, catching glimpses of the world within, a world of amber light and cigarette smoke, where women in bright dresses smiled at men who paid for the privilege. Rain began to fall, the first drops in weeks, turning the dust to mud within seconds. June had no coat, no umbrella, nothing but the thin dress that was already soaked through. She could go home, face her father's disappointed eyes and Maddox's threats, or she could cross the street. She crossed the street. The saloon's warmth hit her like a wall. The place was packed with miners off shift, cowboys passing through, gamblers who never seemed to leave. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sweet, sick smell of spilled beer. Conversations died as she entered, every eye turning to the bedraggled young woman who clearly didn't belong. Well. The voice came from behind the bar. A woman in her 50s with henned hair piled high and a dress that had seen better decades. This was Dolores Flynn, proprietress of the Silver Fang, who'd buried 2 husbands and outlived 3 different town marshals. "You lost honey?" June lifted her chin. "I'm looking for work." Someone snickered. Dolores silenced him with a look that could peel paint. She studied June with eyes that had seen too much to be easily surprised. "What kind of work?" "Any kind. I can clean, wash dishes, mend clothes." "Can you pour whiskey without spilling it?" "I can learn." "Can you smile when a man says something crude?" "Can you dodge a grabbing hand without starting a fight?" "Can you mop up blood and vomit and worse without losing your breakfast?" June met her gaze steadily. "If it pays, I can do whatever needs doing." Dolores nodded slowly. "That's what they all say, honey. Right up until they realize what whatever means in a place like this." The saloon doors swung open again, bringing a gust of rain-cooled air. The man who entered moved with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to violence, though he wore his authority lightly. Marshal Caleb Rourke was tall and lean, with prematurely gray streaks in his dark hair and eyes the color of winter storm clouds. His badge caught the lamplight as he surveyed the room, and conversations resumed with the forced casualness of the guilty. "Afternoon, Marshal," Dolores called out. "The usual?" He nodded, making his way to the bar. His gaze swept over June once, cataloging her presence the way he might note a new horse at the hitching post or an unfamiliar face at the poker table. She felt exposed under that glance, acutely aware of her soaked dress, her tangled hair, the mud on her shoes. "There was a dust-up at the Morrison place," he said to Dolores, though his eyes lingered on June. "Someone's been running a shell game near the school." "You wouldn't know anything about that?" "Do I look like someone who'd corrupt the youth?" Dolores asked innocently. A ghost of a smile crossed the marshal's face. "You look like someone who'd corrupt the angels themselves if there was profit in it." "Flattery will get you everywhere." She poured him a whiskey. "This here's June Walker. She's looking for work." The marshal's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Everyone knew the Walker name, knew the story of the family's fall from respectability to ruin. "That so?" June forced herself to meet his gaze. Yes, sir. You know what kind of work goes on here? I know I need to eat, Marshal, and so does my father. He studied her for a long moment, then knocked back his whiskey in one smooth motion. Stay out of trouble, Miss Walker. He left money on the bar and headed for the back room where the serious gambling happened. June watched him go, noting the slight hitch in his left leg, an old injury that showed only when he was tired. That one's not for you, Dolores said quietly. Caleb Rourke's got more ghosts than a graveyard. Lost his woman in the war. Came out here to forget. Been forgetting for near on 10 years now. I'm not looking for... I know what you're not looking for. Dolores cut her off. Question is, do you know what you are looking for? Because once you start working here, crossing back over to the respectable side of town gets a mite difficult. June thought of her father, coughing his lungs out on a moldy mattress. Thought of Maddox and his threats, of 3 weeks' rent and empty bellies. When can I start? Dolores sighed. You always get them when they've got that look, like they're drowning and you're the only piece of driftwood in sight. She reached under the bar and pulled out a stained apron. Kitchen's in the back. Rosa will show you where we keep the soap and rags. You'll start with the dishes, work your way up to mopping floors, $1 a day plus meals, and you keep any tips you earn honest. Anyone puts a hand on you without permission, you tell me or Buck. He's the big fellow by the door. We run a saloon, not a brothel. The girls upstairs, they choose their own customers and keep their own earnings minus house percentage. That clear? Yes, ma'am. Don't ma'am me, honey. I ain't respectable enough for ma'am. She jerked her head toward the kitchen. Go on then. And June, get yourself a different dress if you can. That one's about to fall apart. And we've got enough naked desperation in here without advertising it. June made her way through the crowd, feeling the weight of their stares. In the kitchen, she found Rosa, a Mexican woman with kind eyes and quick hands, who showed her to a mountain of dirty glasses and plates. You the Walker girl? Rosa asked in accented English. Yes. Your papa. He used to be a good man. Before the accident. June's hands stilled in the soapy water. Few people remembered her father from before. You knew him then? He helped my husband once. Got him a job at the mine when nobody would hire a Mexican. Rosa touched her shoulder gently. Life is hard, Nina, but it's harder when you're alone. You need anything, you ask Rosa. June nodded, not trusting her voice. She plunged her hands back into the water and began to scrub. The simple rhythm of the work, a relief after the day's humiliations. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the dust from Copper Hollow's streets, but unable to clean what lay beneath. As she worked, she could hear the marshal's voice from the back room, calm and authoritative as he questioned someone about the shell game. She thought of his gray eyes, the way they'd seen through her pride to the desperation beneath. Stay out of trouble, he'd said. But in a place like Copper Hollow, trouble had a way of finding you whether you stayed still or not. The dishes seemed endless, and by the time she'd worked through them, her hands were raw and her back ached. But her stomach was full for the first time in days. Rosa had slipped her bread and stew, and she had $3 in her pocket, advance on her wages that Dolores had gruffly insisted she take. For whatever emergencies got you desperate enough to darken my doorway, the older woman had said. June walked home through streets turned to rivers of mud. Her thin dress no protection against the cold rain, but she held her head high. The weight of the coins in her pocket a small armor against the town's judgment. She'd crossed a line today, stepped from the respectable poor to the questionable employed. Tomorrow, she'd wake up as one of the Silver Fangs girls, not upstairs, not yet, but close enough that the distinction wouldn't matter to most. But tonight, she had money for food and maybe enough left over to buy her father the medicine that might ease his cough. It wasn't redemption, but it was survival. And in Copper Hollow, sometimes that was the best you could hope for. 2 weeks into her employment at the Silver Fang, June had learned the rhythm of the place like a song played on repeat. The mornings were quiet, filled with the ghost smells of the night before. Afternoons brought the first trickle of customers, Lonely men nursing whiskeys and old grievances. But nights were when the saloon came alive with all its dangerous glory. She'd developed a system for surviving. Keep her head down, her hands busy, her responses brief. When Dolores had promoted her from dishwasher to floor cleaner, June had accepted the visibility that came with it as a necessary evil. The extra 50 cents a day meant medicine for her father's worsening cough. On this particular Saturday night, the Silver Fang was packed to the rafters. A cattle drive had just come through, and the cowboys were spending their pay with enthusiasm. June wove between tables, bucket and mop in hand, dodging elbows and avoiding eye contact. The noise was deafening. Piano music competing with drunken singing, the clatter of poker chips, the crash of glass breaking somewhere in the back. "Hey there, sweet thing!" A meaty hand grabbed her wrist as she passed. The cowboy attached to it was young, drunk, and clearly feeling lucky. "Why don't you put down that bucket and sit a spell?" "I'm working," June said quietly, trying to pull away without causing a scene. His grip tightened. "Come on now, don't be unfriendly. I got money." "The girls upstairs are who you want," she said, still trying to extract herself. "I just clean. Maybe I like 'em clean." He slurred, pulling harder. June's bucket tipped, sending dirty water across his boots. The cowboy jumped up with a curse, his face flushing red. "You little—" "Problem here?" Marshal Caleb Rourke materialized beside them like smoke. He wasn't on duty. His badge was absent, his gray shirt unbuttoned at the collar, but authority radiated from him regardless, turning the rowdy saloon momentarily quiet around their small drama. The cowboy's hand dropped from June's wrist. "No problem. Marshal, just trying to be friendly." "Miss Walker's not paid to be friendly. She's paid to keep this place from becoming even more of a sty than it already is." Caleb's voice was mild, almost conversational, but his eyes were winter cold. "I'd suggest you let her get on with it." For a moment, the cowboy's drunk brain considered challenging him. Then self-preservation kicked in. He muttered something that might have been an apology and stumbled back to his table. "Thank you," June said quietly, retrieving her mop. Caleb studied her for a moment. "You hurt?" She shook her head, though her wrist throbbed where the cowboy had grabbed it. "It's nothing new. That doesn't make it right. Lots of things aren't right. Marshal, doesn't stop them from happening." He was quiet for so long she thought he'd walked away. When she glanced up, he was still watching her with those storm cloud eyes. "Your father still alive?" The question surprised her. "Yes. The doctor could see him. I could arrange—" "We don't take charity." The words came out sharper than she intended. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Pride's a luxury folks like us can't afford. Miss Walker—" "Folks like us?" She straightened, forgetting the mop. "You're the law here. You've got respect, a house, steady pay. What would you know about folks like us?" Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or memory. "More than you might think." Before she could respond, chaos erupted near the faro table. "You're cheating! You son of a—" The accusation was cut short by the sound of a fist meeting jaw. Within seconds, the fight spread like wildfire. Tables overturned, bottles flew, and the carefully maintained order of the Silver Fang dissolved into mayhem. June found herself trapped between the bar and a wall of brawling men. She tried to edge toward the kitchen, but the crowd surged, pressing her back. A chair flew past her head, shattering against the wall. Someone's elbow caught her in the ribs, driving the breath from her lungs. Then she saw him, a small boy, maybe 7 years old, cowering under an overturned table. What he was doing in the saloon at this hour was anybody's guess, but there he was, tears streaming down his dirty face as boots stomped dangerously close to his hiding spot. Without thinking, June dove forward. She grabbed the boy, pulling him against her chest just as a heavy boot came down where his hand had been. They needed better cover, but the path to safety was blocked by the fighting. "Hold on," she whispered to the boy, who clung to her like a drowning man to driftwood. She tried to stand, only to be knocked back down by the press of bodies. The boy whimpered, burying his face in her shoulder. June curled around him, making herself a shield as the violence raged overhead. Strong hands grabbed her shoulders, hauling her and the boy up and out of the chaos with surprising gentleness. Caleb half carried, half dragged them through the crowd, his presence parting the fighters like Moses with the Red Sea. He deposited them in the relatively calm corner by the piano, then waded back into the fray. June watched, mesmerized despite herself, as he restored order with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. He didn't throw punches or draw his gun. Instead, he used leverage, momentum, and the kind of calculated force that subdued without causing permanent damage. Within minutes, the main instigators were separated, the crowd was settling, and Buck was escorting the worst offenders to the door. "Danny!" A woman burst through the saloon doors, wild-eyed with panic. "Danny, where are you?" The boy in June's arms lifted his head. "Mama!" The reunion was tearful and brief. The woman, a laundress June recognized from around town, clutched her son with one hand and June's fingers with the other. "Thank you," she whispered. "He ran off while I was working late. I thought, when I heard the fighting." She pressed a coin into June's palm. "Thank you." They left quickly, the boy peering over his mother's shoulder to wave goodbye. June looked down at the coin. A silver dollar, probably more than the woman could afford. She tried to follow them, to give it back, but Caleb appeared at her elbow. "Let her pay," he said quietly. "She needs to feel she squared the debt." June pocketed the coin reluctantly. Around them, the saloon was returning to its normal state of controlled chaos. Men righted tables. Rosa appeared with a broom for the broken glass. And incredibly, the piano player started up again with a jaunty tune. "You could have been hurt," Caleb said. "That was foolish. So was wading into a bar fight without your badge or gun. I had my gun." He shifted slightly, revealing the handle of a Colt tucked into his waistband. "Just didn't need it." "Well, I didn't have anything except the sense to help a scared child." "Sense?" He almost smiled. "That what you call diving under a table in the middle of a brawl? Would you have left him there?" "No," he admitted. "But I'm paid to be foolish. You're paid to mop floors." They stood there in the wreckage, an odd island of calm while the cleanup went on around them. June became aware that people were watching, not openly, but with the sideways glances of those scenting gossip. "I should get back to work," she said. He nodded, but didn't move aside. "Your wrist, from earlier, let me see. It's fine." June. Her name on his lips stopped her cold. When had she become June instead of Miss Walker? "Please." Reluctantly, she extended her arm. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as they probed the bruises already forming on her skin. She tried not to notice the calluses on his palms. The small scars that spoke of violence survived, the way his touch seemed to burn even through her sleeves. "Nothing broken," he said, releasing her. "But you should wrap it. Cold compress tonight, if you have ice." "Ice," she repeated with a bitter laugh. "Sure, Marshal. Right after I have my servants draw my bath." His jaw tightened. "The doctor, I said no charity." "It's not—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met." "Second stubbornest," June corrected. "My mother was worse." "Was." She turned away, retrieving her mop. "Was." This time he did step aside, but she felt his gaze follow her as she returned to work. The rest of the night passed in a blur of mopping, dodging, and carefully not thinking about gray eyes and gentle hands. It was near dawn when she finally left, her day's wages clutched tight in her fist. The streets were empty except for a few drunks sleeping it off in doorways and the occasional cat hunting for mice. June hurried through the pre-dawn darkness, eager to get home before the respectable folk began their day. She found her father awake, which was unusual. He sat propped against the wall, his breathing labored but his eyes clearer than they'd been in months. "Junebug," he wheezed, using her childhood nickname. "My girl." "Pa." She knelt beside him, alarmed by the gray cast to his skin. "Let me get you some water." "No." He caught her hand with surprising strength. Need to tell you. Tell me what? Proud, he gasped. So proud of you, your mother. She'd be proud too. Pa, don't. Listen. His grip tightened. I know what I am. Know what I've become. But you're steel, Junebug, bent but not broken, like her. Tears burned her eyes. You need medicine. I have money now. I can. Too late for medicine. He smiled, and for a moment she glimpsed the man he'd been. But not too late for truth. Your mother didn't leave. Sent her away. What? Was sick, coughing blood. Didn't want you to watch her die. His breath rattled in his chest. Didn't want you to remember her that way. So I sent her to her sister in California. Told everyone she ran off. June felt the world tilt. She died, thinking I hated her for leaving. No. Her father squeezed her hand. Wrote letters, hidden in the floor under the stove. Never had the courage to tell you before. He closed his eyes, exhausted by the confession. June sat frozen, her mind reeling. All these years of thinking her mother had abandoned them, when really. She tore up the loose floorboard with her bare hands, finding the packet of letters wrapped in oilcloth. Her mother's handwriting, faded but legible. Words of love, of regret, of hope that her daughter would understand. By the time she finished reading, the sun was up and her father's breathing had grown dangerously shallow. She ran for the doctor. Pride be damned. But Dr. Morrison took one look and shook his head. Pneumonia, he said quietly. Both lungs. I can ease his passing, but... Please, June whispered. The doctor did what he could, which wasn't much. Thomas Walker died as the church bells rang noon. His daughter's hand in his and his wife's letters spread across the bed. June sat with him until the undertaker came. She had just enough money for a pine box and a plot in the paupers section of the cemetery. As they carried him out, she noticed Marshal Rourke standing across the street, hat in his hands. He didn't approach, didn't offer empty condolences. But when she walked to the cemetery that evening to see where they'd put him, she found a simple wooden cross already in place, her father's name carved deep and clear. She knew without asking who had paid for it. That night, she returned to the Silver Fang because she had nowhere else to go and bills still to pay. Dolores took one look at her and poured a shot of the good whiskey. On the house, she said gruffly. For your loss. June knocked it back, feeling it burn all the way down. Around her, life went on. Men gambled, women laughed, glasses clinked, but something had shifted. She'd lost her last anchor to respectability, but gained something else. Truth, understanding, and maybe, just maybe, the first stirring of something that felt like hope. When Caleb Rourke came in for his usual evening round, their eyes met across the crowded room. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of shared grief. She nodded back, then returned to her work. There would be time for thank yous later, time for questions about wooden crosses and acts of quiet kindness. But tonight, she would mourn her father and celebrate her mother and try to make sense of a world where love could wear so many disguises. Tonight, she would survive. Tomorrow, she would begin to live. The whispers started 3 weeks after her father's burial. June first noticed them at Morrison's general store, where she'd gone to buy thread for mending. The conversation between Mrs. Morrison and Mrs. Hartley stopped mid-sentence when she walked in, both women turning to stare with expressions that mixed disapproval with eager curiosity. Miss Walker, Mrs. Morrison said, her tone several degrees cooler than before. I heard you're still working at that establishment. Yes, ma'am. June kept her voice steady, though her cheeks burned. I have bills to pay. Of course you do, Mrs. Hartley's smile was sharp as broken glass. And I'm sure the Marshal's frequent visits there have nothing to do with your employment decisions. June's hands tightened on her basket. Marshal Rourke patrols all the establishments in town. It's his job. Every night, Mrs. Hartley pressed. Sometimes twice. My Herbert says he's never seen a lawman, so dedicated to maintaining order in just one saloon. The implications hung in the air like smoke. June paid for her thread and left without another word, but she could feel their eyes following her all the way to the door. Outside, she nearly collided with Reverend Blackwood, who looked at her with such profound disappointment that she felt like a child caught stealing penny candy. "Miss Walker," he intoned, "I've been meaning to speak with you about your immortal soul. My soul is my own concern, Reverend." "Is it?" His eyes glittered with righteous fervor. "When your choices reflect upon the moral fabric of our entire community, when you tempt good men into sin." "I wash floors and empty spittoons," June said through gritted teeth. "If that's tempting men to sin, then perhaps the problem lies with the men, not with me." The Reverend's face purpled. "Such pride. No wonder your poor father drank himself to death, with a daughter who—" "Reverend." The voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Caleb Rourke stood 10 feet away, his badge catching the sunlight. "I believe Mrs. Blackwood was looking for you at the church. Something about the altar flowers." It was clearly a dismissal. The Reverend sputtered but retreated, shooting June one last condemning look. She stood there trembling. Whether from rage or mortification, she couldn't tell. "You didn't have to do that," she said when they were alone. "Yes," Caleb said simply. "I did." They stood there in the dusty street, aware of eyes watching from windows and doorways. June could practically hear the gossip mills grinding to life. The Marshal and the Saloon girl, standing together in broad daylight. By evening, the story would have grown beyond all recognition. "This isn't helping," she said quietly. "Your defending me only makes them talk more. Let them talk. Easy for you to say. You're not the one they're calling." She bit off the word, but they both knew what she meant. The names had started circulating. Saloon girl was the kindest of them. His jaw tightened. "Anyone who judges you while shopping at Morrison's with money their husbands lost at poker is a hypocrite." "That may be true, but it doesn't change anything." She shifted her basket to her other arm. "I should go." "June," her name again, spoken like it meant something. "The offer stands, about the doctor, about other arrangements. You don't have to work there. And what would I do instead?" She met his gaze squarely. "Become your kept woman. Give them something real to gossip about." Color rose in his cheeks. "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" She was being cruel, but the morning's humiliations had scraped her raw. "What exactly are you offering, Marshal? And what would you expect in return?" He took a step back as if she'd slapped him. "Nothing. I expect nothing. I just—" He removed his hat, ran a hand through his hair. "I hate seeing you there. Every night, watching those men look at you like you're something they could buy if the price was right. You're better than that place." "No," June said softly. "I'm not. That's what you don't understand. I'm exactly where I belong, the daughter of the town drunk, mopping up after men who can't hold their liquor, at least at the Silver Fang. They're honest about what I am." She walked away before he could respond, her spine straight despite the weight of judgment pressing down from all sides. But his words echoed in her mind through the long afternoon as she mended clothes in her empty shack. "You're better than that place." That evening at the Silver Fang, the atmosphere was different. The usual rowdy crowd seemed subdued, and June caught men looking at her with new interest. Word had spread about the morning's encounters. The Marshal's Saloon girl. They were calling her now. She heard it whispered as she passed, saw it in the knowing smirks and calculating glances. "You've got an admirer." Sally, one of the upstairs girls, said as June emptied ashtrays near the bar. "Must be nice, having a lawman sweet on you." "He's not sweet on me." Sally laughed, but not unkindly. "Honey, that man watches you like a hawk watches a rabbit. Except I don't think eating you is what he's got in mind. Well, not that kind of eating, anyway." June's face flamed. "It's not like that." "Sure it's not." Sally leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Word of advice, men like the Marshal, they've got honor. Makes them complicated. They want to save you, put you on a pedestal, make you into something you're not. The cowboys and miners, they're simpler. They want what they want, and they pay for it, and everyone knows where they stand. I'm not looking for either kind, June insisted. Maybe not, but looking and finding are two different things. Sally patted her shoulder. Just be careful. A broken heart heals easier than a broken reputation, and you're walking a mighty thin line, as if summoned by the conversation. Caleb walked through the doors. He looked tired, dust from the trail coating his clothes. He'd been out of town, June realized, probably chasing rustlers or investigating claims. He made his way to his usual corner table, and June felt the weight of every eye in the place as she approached with a whiskey bottle and glass. Long ride? She asked, pouring. Williams Ranch, cattle thieves. He knocked back the drink, and she poured another. Any trouble while I was gone? Nothing Buck couldn't handle. He nodded, but his eyes searched her face. You look tired. Pot calling the kettle black. Marshal? That almost smile crossed his features. Fair enough. She should have walked away then, but something held her there. Maybe it was the weariness in his shoulders or the way he kept rubbing his left leg where the old injury pained him. When's the last time you ate? This morning. Maybe yesterday morning. Hard to recall. Without thinking, she said, Wait here. She returned with a plate from the kitchen. Beef stew, cornbread, the apple pie Rosa had made for the staff. Simple food, but hot and filling. Caleb looked at it, then at her, something unreadable in his expression. Thank you. She turned to go, but his hand caught her wrist, gentle. Nothing like the cowboy from weeks before. Sit, please, just for a moment. June glanced around. The saloon was watching, waiting. If she sat, if she gave them this ammunition. But his thumb was tracing small circles on her wrist, and she was so tired of standing. She sat. This is a mistake, she said quietly. Probably. He released her wrist but didn't lean back, maintaining a closeness that would be noted and discussed. Do you care? I have to care. This job is all I have. It doesn't have to be. We've had this conversation. No, we've danced around this conversation. His voice was low, intense. I'm not talking about charity. June, I'm talking about... Caleb, a new voice interrupted. Jack Morrison, the store owner's son, stumbled up to their table, drunk, armed, and from the look in his eyes, spoiling for trouble. Marshal Caleb Rourke, man of the law, defender of virtue. Caleb's expression didn't change, but June saw his hand shift slightly toward his gun. Jack, you're drunk. Go home. Can't a man have a drink after a hard day's work? Jack's gaze slid to June, ugly and insinuating. Or is this table reserved for the marshal and his whore? The word hung in the air like a slap. June felt the blood drain from her face, then rush back in a hot wave of humiliation. Around them, the saloon had gone dead quiet. Caleb stood slowly, deliberately. Apologize. For what? Calling a spade a spade? Jack swayed but stood his ground. Everyone knows what she is. Everyone knows why you really come here every night. I said apologize. Or what? You'll arrest me? Shoot me? Jack laughed, high and mocking. Go ahead. Marshal, defend her honor. Such as it is. Caleb moved so fast June barely saw it. One moment Jack was standing. The next he was on the floor, blood streaming from his nose. Caleb hauled him up by the collar, his face inches from the younger man's. You will apologize to Miss Walker, he said, each word precise and cold. You will do it now, and you will mean it, or I will break every bone in your worthless body and drag what's left to jail. Jack mumbled something that might have been an apology. Caleb released him with a shove that sent him stumbling toward the door. The silence that followed was deafening. June stood on unsteady legs. I have work to do. She fled to the kitchen, where she stood shaking over the dish basin. Rosa found her there minutes later, tears she refused to shed burning her eyes. Come, Mija, Rosa said gently. Let's get you home. I can't leave. Dolores will understand. Buck is already dealing with the marshal. June allowed herself to be led out the back door. away from the stares and whispers. But even in the dark alley, she could feel the weight of what had happened. The Marshal had defended her honor with violence. He'd made a public claim, whether he'd intended to or not. By tomorrow, she wouldn't just be the saloon girl anymore. She'd be the Marshal's woman, bought and paid for in blood and reputation. The men would treat her differently, some with newfound respect, others with resentment. The women would close ranks entirely, cutting her off from even the slim possibility of redemption. She thought of her mother's letters, hidden now beneath her pillow. Her mother, who'd left to spare her family the shame of her illness. What would she think of her daughter now, trapped between poverty and disgrace, between a violent world that used women and a gentle man whose protection came at the cost of everything else? June didn't have an answer. All she had was the memory of Caleb's thumb on her wrist, tracing circles like a promise neither of them could keep. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new humiliations. But tonight, she would lock her door and read her mother's letters and pretend, just for a moment, that love could exist without price tags or consequences. That somewhere in this hard, dusty world, there was space for two damaged people to find something like grace. It was a fool's dream. But then, June reflected as she reached her shack. She'd been called worse things than a fool today, and unlike those other names, this one she'd chosen for herself. The knock came just after midnight, sharp and insistent against the thin wood of June's door. She jolted awake, heart hammering. In Copper Hollow, midnight visitors meant trouble, debt collectors, drunks, or worse. She reached for the iron poker she kept beside the bed, her father's old pistol long since sold for food. "June." The voice was low, strained. "It's Caleb. Please." She hesitated, then cracked the door. He stood there swaying slightly, one hand pressed to his side. In the moonlight, she could see dark wetness seeping between his fingers. "You're hurt." She dropped the poker, pulling him inside. "What happened?" "Ambush. 3 men, maybe 4. He stumbled, and she caught him, feeling the solid weight of him against her. "Couldn't make it home. Too far." June lit a lamp with shaking hands. The light revealed the extent of the damage, his shirt torn and bloody, a gash along his ribs, his face pale beneath trail dust and stubble. She guided him to the single chair, her mind racing. "You need the doctor?" "No." He caught her hand. "Can't trust him. Not tonight. Please, June. Just help me clean it. I'll be gone before dawn." She wanted to argue, but something in his eyes stopped her. Fear, maybe, or trust. She wasn't sure which frightened her more. June heated water on the small stove, gathered what clean cloth she had. When she returned, he was struggling with his shirt, each movement drawing a hiss of pain. Without thinking, she moved to help, her fingers working the buttons with practiced efficiency from years of tending her father. The shirt fell away, revealing the lean, scarred landscape of his torso. The new wound was ugly, but not deep, a graze rather than a puncture. But it was the old scars that made her breath catch. White lines crisscrossed his chest and back, some straight and surgical, others jagged with violence. "War?" she asked quietly, dipping cloth in warm water. "Some. Others came after." He tensed as she began cleaning the wound. "Man in my position collects enemies like dogs collect fleas." Who was it tonight? Coleman's boys. Probably. I've been investigating their rustling operation. Getting close. He sucked in a breath as she dabbed at a particularly raw spot. "Guess I got too close." June worked in silence, aware of the intimacy of the moment. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, muscles tensing and relaxing with each touch. She could smell him, leather and gunpowder, sweat and something uniquely male that made her stomach flutter in unfamiliar ways. "Why did you come here?" she asked finally. "You have friends, deputies. None I trust the way I trust you." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. June's hand stilled on his skin. "You don't know me," she whispered. "Don't I?" He turned slightly, wincing, to look at her. I know you dove under a table to save a child you'd never met. I know you work yourself bloody to pay your father's debts even after he's gone. I know you hold your head high when lesser folks would break. You know what everyone knows? That I'm the town drunk's daughter who mops floors in a saloon? I know you're the strongest person in this godforsaken town. His hand covered hers where it rested on his chest. I know I can't stop thinking about you, that watching you in that place, seeing how they look at you, it's killing me by degrees. June pulled her hand away, busying herself with bandages. You're delirious. Loss of blood. Maybe. He was quiet while she wound cloth around his ribs, securing the dressing. Then, my Sarah used to do this. Patch me up after fights. She had gentle hands, like you. June had heard mentions of the woman he'd lost, but never her name. Tell me about her. Why? Because you're sitting half naked in my home at midnight, bleeding on my only chair. I think that earns me a story. He almost smiled. Fair enough. Sarah was. She was sunshine, laughter, everything soft and good that the war hadn't touched yet. Her father owned a store in Richmond. I was stationed there, recovering from. He gestured to one of the older scars. She brought me books, talked to me about poetry and music and everything except battles and dying. June tied off the bandage, then sat back on her heels. You loved her. I was drowning, and she was air. Of course I loved her. His eyes were distant, lost in memory. We had 3 months, planned a whole life in 3 months. Then the siege started, and she was tending wounded when the church took a shell. He didn't need to finish. June had heard enough war stories to know how they ended. Is that why you came west? To forget? To run, he corrected. But turns out, you can't outrun what's inside your own head, so I became the law instead. Figured if I couldn't save her, maybe I could save other people, make some kind of sense out of the senselessness. June stood, moving to the stove to make tea, something to do with her hands, to ease the tightness in her throat. And now you want to save me? No. His voice was rough. Now I want you to save me. She turned, startled. He was watching her with those storm cloud eyes, all defenses stripped away. I've been dead inside for 10 years. June, going through the motions, keeping the peace, but dead all the same. Then you walked into that saloon, proud and desperate and so damn alive. And I started feeling things I thought I'd buried with Sarah. Caleb, I know I have no right. I know what you must think, another man trying to buy you, just with prettier words. But I swear to you, that's not what this is. Then what is it? Her voice was barely a whisper. He stood, moving toward her with careful steps. I don't know. I just know that when I'm near you, I remember what it feels like to want tomorrow to come. When you smile, really smile, not that mask you wear at work. It's like watching the sunrise. And when that bastard called you, his fists clenched. I wanted to kill him. Would have, if you hadn't run. They stood close now, the small room suddenly airless. June could see the pulse beating in his throat, could feel the heat radiating from his skin. She thought of all the reasons this was impossible. The talk, the consequences, the vast gulf between a Marshal and a saloon girl. But stronger than logic was the pull she felt, the answering ache in her chest. She lifted a hand, traced one of the scars with a trembling finger. What is it you want from me? She asked. Everything, he said simply. But I'll take whatever you're willing to give, even if it's just this. One night of honesty between us. June looked into his eyes and made her choice, rising on her toes. She pressed her lips to his, tentative, uncertain. He went absolutely still, as if afraid to spook her. Then his arms came around her, gentle despite his injury, and he kissed her back with a tenderness that made her knees weak. It was nothing like the crude pawing she'd dodged at the saloon. This was reverent, almost worshipful. He kissed her like she was precious, breakable, worth savoring. His hands tangled in her loose hair, and she could feel him trembling, from pain or desire, or both. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. June! Shh! She took his hand, led him to the narrow bed. "You're hurt. You need rest." "That's not what I need," he said roughly, but he let her push him down onto the mattress. She blew out the lamp, then stood in the darkness, heart pounding. She thought of her mother's letters, of choices made for love, of her father's weakness and Caleb's strength, of tomorrow's consequences and tonight's possibilities. Slowly, she unbuttoned her nightgown, let it pool at her feet. The moonlight through the window turned her skin to silver as she slipped into bed beside him. He made a sound, prayer or curse, and pulled her against him. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice strained. "I'm sure of nothing," she admitted, "except that I'm tired of being cold and alone." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she let herself get lost in it, in the warmth of his skin, the careful strength of his touch, the way he whispered her name like a benediction. They came together slowly, mindful of his injury, learning each other in the dark. It was nothing like the stories the Saloon girls told, those tales of quick, transactional encounters. This was communion, two wounded souls finding shelter in each other. Caleb touched her with reverence, as if mapping sacred ground. And June felt something inside her crack open, some wall she'd built against hoping for anything beyond survival. Afterward, they lay entwined, her head on his chest where she could hear his heartbeat gradually slow. His fingers combed through her hair, gentle and rhythmic. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," he admitted. "But for tonight, can we pretend we're just two people? Not the Marshal and the Saloon girl, but Caleb and June." She lifted her head to look at him. In the moonlight, with his defenses down and his eyes soft with something that might be love. He looked younger, vulnerable, human. "Just Caleb and June," she agreed, settling back against him. They talked through the remaining hours, about books and dreams, childhoods before the world hardened them, small jokes that meant nothing except they could share them. He told her about his family's farm in Ohio, the brother who'd died at Antietam. She spoke of her mother's garden, the songs she used to sing. When dawn began to lighten the sky, they fell silent. Reality crept back with the sun, bringing with it all the reasons this couldn't last. Caleb sat up carefully, testing his bandages. "I should go before people start stirring." June watched him dress, memorizing the sight. When he was ready, hat in hand, he turned back to her. "This doesn't have to be goodbye," he said. "Doesn't it?" She pulled the sheet higher, suddenly aware of her nakedness. "You're the law. I'm what I am. Last night doesn't change that. It changes everything. For us, maybe, not for them." She thought of the town, already suspicious, already talking. "If anyone saw you come here, then we'll face it, together." "You mean you'll face it? You'll lose your position, your respect, everything you've built here. Without you, none of that means anything." She wanted to believe him, wanted to live in the world he was offering, where love conquered propriety and hope outlasted gossip. But she'd learned too young that wanting something didn't make it possible. "Go," she said softly, "before I'm selfish enough to ask you to stay." He crossed to the bed, kissed her once more, fierce and quick. "This isn't over, June, not by a long shot." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the brightening dawn and the scent of him on her pillow. June lay there, caught between memory and mourning, wondering if she'd been saved or ruined. Perhaps, she thought as she finally rose to face the day, there wasn't much difference between the two. Perhaps salvation and ruin were just different names for the moment when you stopped merely surviving and started truly living, whatever the cost. The morning after Caleb left, June tried to pretend nothing had changed. She rose, washed, braided her hair with the same careful movements as every other day. But her hands trembled, and in the small mirror, her eyes held secrets that hadn't been there before. By the time she reached the Silver Fang for her afternoon shift, the pretense was shattered. Well, Dolores stood behind the bar, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "The Marshal's horse was seen outside your place before dawn. Care to explain?" June's stomach dropped. He was injured, needed help. I'm sure he did. Dolores's voice was dry as desert sand. And I'm sure you provided exactly the kind of help he needed. It wasn't... June stopped. What could she say? That it wasn't what it looked like? But it was exactly what it looked like, and more. Dolores sighed. Sit down, girl. We need to talk. June sank onto a bar stool, acutely aware of the other girls watching from the stairs. Sally gave her a sympathetic look, but the others ranged from curious to hostile. I've run this place for 15 years. Dolores began. Seen every kind of trouble there is, but a marshal taking up with one of my girls? That's new territory. I'm not one of your girls, June said quietly. I just clean. You work here, in the eyes of this town. That makes you mine. Dolores poured 2 whiskeys, pushed one across. Question is, what do we do about it? Nothing changes. I'll keep working. Everything changes. Dolores cut her off. You think those men out there are going to treat you the same, knowing the marshals claimed you? You think the other girls won't resent you for bringing his attention here? June stared at the whiskey, understanding dawning. You're letting me go. I'm giving you a choice. Stay and deal with whatever comes. Or take this. Dolores pulled out a small leather pouch, heavy with coins. Call it severance pay. Enough to get you to the next town. Start fresh. I can't leave. This is my home. No, girl, this was your father's grave. There's a difference. Before June could respond, the saloon doors burst open, not with the usual swagger of afternoon customers, but with violence. 3 women stormed in, faces twisted with righteous fury. June recognized them. Mrs. Morrison, Mrs. Hartley, and Reverend Blackwood's wife, the unofficial moral guardians of Copper Hollow. There she is, Mrs. Blackwood pointed at June like she was naming a witch. The harlot who's corrupted our Marshal. Dolores stepped forward. This is a place of business. Ladies, if you're not here to drink, we're here for her. Mrs. Morrison's voice shook with rage. She needs to answer for what she's done. What I've done? June found her voice. I've worked honest hours for honest pay. Honest, Mrs. Hartley laughed, high and cruel. Is that what you call spreading your legs for any man with $1? Now you've set your sights on the one decent lawman we have? That's enough. Sally descended the stairs, followed by the other working girls. They formed a protective semicircle around June. You sanctimonious hypocrites have no right to come in here throwing stones. We have every right to protect our community from disease. Mrs. Blackwood spat. Disease? Rosa emerged from the kitchen, meat cleaver in hand. The only disease I see is in your hearts, senoras. The tension crackled like lightning before a storm. June stood, pushing past her defenders. She faced the 3 women, chin high despite the burning in her eyes. You want me gone, she said quietly. I understand, but answer me this. Where was your Christian charity when my father was dying? Where was your community protection when we were starving? You turned your backs on us long before I set foot in this saloon. Your father was a drunk. Mrs. Morrison began. My father was sick. June's voice cracked like a whip. He was a good man broken by loss, and you let him rot, all of you. So yes, I work here. Yes, I've fallen from your precious grace. But at least the people in this saloon know what kindness means. Kindness, Mrs. Blackwood stepped forward. Is that what you call what happened last night? The Marshal leaving your shack at dawn, marked with your sin? The words hung in the air like a noose. June felt every eye in the place on her, waiting. She could deny it, make excuses, beg for understanding. Instead, she lifted her chin higher. What happened between Marshal Rourke and myself is no concern of yours. The admission, oblique as it was, sent ripples through the room. Mrs. Hartley gasped. Mrs. Morrison's face went purple, but it was Mrs. Blackwood who moved, fast as a striking snake, her hand connected with June's cheek in a slap that echoed through the saloon. June's head snapped sideways. She tasted blood, felt the sting spread like fire, but she didn't fall, didn't cower. She turned back slowly, meeting Mrs. Blackwood's eyes with a steady gaze. "Feel better?" she asked quietly. "Mrs." Blackwood raised her hand again, but suddenly Caleb was there. He'd entered silent as smoke, and now stood between June and her attackers. He wasn't wearing his badge, she noticed, just his guns and a face carved from stone. "Ladies," he said, voice deadly calm, "I believe you are leaving. Marshal Rourke, Mrs." Morrison tried for righteous indignation, but fear leaked through. "We're simply addressing a threat to public morality. The only threat I see is 3 citizens disturbing the peace and assaulting a woman." He stepped closer. "Would you like me to make arrests? I'm sure your husbands would enjoy bailing you out of my jail." "You wouldn't dare." "Mrs." Blackwood hissed. "Not for this trumped-up little—" "Choose your next word very carefully," Caleb warned, "because I've had about enough of this town's hypocrisy. You stand in church every Sunday, sing about mercy and compassion, then spend the rest of the week casting stones. She's corrupted you." "Mrs." Morrison whispered. "Turned you from righteousness?" "No, ma'am. She's reminded me what righteousness actually looks like." He glanced at June, and the tenderness in his eyes made her throat tight. "It looks like courage in the face of contempt, dignity when everyone's trying to strip it away, grace when none is given in return." The 3 women retreated, but Mrs. Blackwood turned at the door. "This isn't over. The town council will hear about this. Your position is mine to lose." Caleb finished. "Now get out." They fled, and the saloon exhaled collectively. But June felt no relief. The battle was won, but the war had just begun. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. "Someone had to." He touched her reddened cheek gently. "You're bleeding. I'll live." She stepped back, aware of their audience. "But you might not, professionally speaking." "June." "No?" She turned to Dolores. "I'll take your offer. The money, I'll leave tonight." "Like hell you will," Caleb said. "It's the only way. If I'm gone, things can go back to normal. You can keep your position, your respect." "I don't want respect from people who would do this to you." His voice was fierce. "I want— What you want doesn't matter." June's composure finally cracked. "Don't you see? They'll destroy you. Take everything you've built. And for what? For me? I'm not worth that. Caleb, I'm not worth losing everything." He caught her shoulders, forced her to meet his eyes. "You're worth everything. Everything. June, my badge, this town, all of it. It's nothing compared to what I found with you last night. Last night was a dream." She whispered. "This is reality." "Then let's change reality." "How?" "By fighting the whole town, by becoming outcasts together." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "That's not a life, Caleb. That's just a different kind of dying." He released her slowly. Around them, the saloon had gone back to its business, offering them the privacy of public indifference. June could see Sally making bets on the outcome, Rosa blessing herself in the kitchen doorway, Dolores watching with knowing eyes. "So you'll run," Caleb said flatly. "Leave me here with nothing. You have your duty, your purpose. That's more than most get. It's not enough, not anymore." He stepped back, something shuddering in his expression. "But I won't force you to stay. If leaving is what you need, then go. Just know that you're taking the best part of me with you." He turned and walked out, leaving June standing there with Dolores's money in her hand and her heart in pieces on the floor. That night, she packed her few belongings, the mother's letters, the father's pipe, all that remained of her family. She folded her 2 dresses, counted the coins that would buy her a stage ticket to anywhere but here. A soft knock interrupted. She opened the door to find Rosa, shawl-wrapped against the cold. "You don't have to go, mija," the older woman said. "We would protect you. From the whole town, from the church, the council. Every proper citizen who wants me gone?" June shook her head. "I've caused enough trouble. Love is not trouble. It's the answer to trouble. Not this kind of love. Not here. June embraced her quickly. Take care of him, if you can. He'll need friends. Rosa pressed something into her hand, a small wooden cross, for protection on your journey. After she left, June sat on her narrow bed, holding the cross. Tomorrow, she'd board the morning stage. She'd disappear into the vast American wilderness, become someone new, someone without a past or a scandal or a love that threatened everything it touched. But tonight, she allowed herself to remember the weight of Caleb's hands, the sound of her name on his lips, the brief, impossible dream of being chosen, wanted, loved. A sound outside made her look up. Through the window, she could see a figure standing in the shadows across the street, tall, still, patient, watching, guarding. Even now, even after everything, he was protecting her. June pressed her fingers to the glass, a goodbye he couldn't see. Then she pulled the curtain closed and finished packing. Some loves were too dangerous to pursue, too costly to claim. Better to leave now, while they both still had something left to salvage. But as she lay down for her last night in Copper Hollow, June wondered if perhaps she was wrong. Perhaps love wasn't measured in what you could afford to lose, but in what you couldn't bear to live without. The thought followed her into dreams where storm cloud eyes promised impossible things, and she wasn't brave enough to run away. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the weight of goodbye. June dressed in her traveling clothes, her better dress, mended but clean, and pinned her hair severely back. She wanted to look respectable for the stage, like someone heading toward something rather than running away. She was closing her carpet bag when the thunder of hooves made her freeze. Not the steady clip-clop of morning traffic, but hard riding. Many horses. Her heart seized as she recognized the voice shouting orders outside. "Burn it all if you have to. Find that drunk's brat." Coleman, the rustler Caleb had been investigating. June's mind raced as she understood. They'd come for her, to use her against Caleb. She grabbed her bag and her father's pistol from beneath the floorboards, checking the cylinder. 3 bullets. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12, back when he was still steady enough to hold a gun. The door exploded inward. June fired once, watching a man clutch his shoulder and stumble back. But there were too many. Rough hands seized her, and someone backhanded her hard enough to make her ears ring. "Got her, boss." Coleman himself entered, a heavy-set man with dead eyes and breath like rotting meat. "Well now, the Marshal's woman. You're going to help us finish some business." "I'm nobody's woman," June spat, earning another blow that split her lip. "We'll see about that." Coleman grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. "Boys saw Rourke heading into that shack of yours. Man who's thinking with his pecker instead of his badge makes mistakes. Fatal ones." They dragged her out into the street. The few early risers scattered at the sight of Coleman's gang. 8 men, all armed, all wanted. June caught a glimpse of Rosa peering from behind a water barrel and tried to shake her head. "Don't be a hero." They threw her belly down over a saddle, tied her hands, and rode hard out of town. June bit down on nausea and fear, trying to track their direction, north toward the abandoned Garrison mine. She'd heard the stories, shafts that went down forever, perfect for disposing of bodies. The ride seemed endless. By the time they stopped, the sun was high and June's ribs felt like they'd been hammered on an anvil. Someone hauled her down, and she stumbled, legs numb. The mine entrance gaped like a mouth in the hillside. Equipment lay scattered, rusty and abandoned, but fresh horses were tethered nearby, and supplies stacked. Coleman had been using this place as a hideout. "Tie her to the post," Coleman ordered, "where he can see her nice and clear." They bound her to a timber beam near the mine entrance, arms wrenched behind her. Coleman checked her knots himself, leaning close enough that she could see the tobacco stains on his teeth. "Pretty little thing," he mused. "Can see why the Marshal got distracted. Course, that's going to cost him today." "He won't come," June said. "He's not stupid." Coleman laughed. "Oh, he'll come. Man like that, all honor and heroics. He'll come alone, too. Try to trade himself for you. He pulled out a knife, traced the flat of the blade along her cheek. Then we'll kill him slow. Let you watch. After that, well, the boys have been on the trail a long time. I'm sure they'll think of ways to entertain themselves. June's stomach turned, but she kept her voice steady. You're making a mistake. Kill him, Marshal, and they'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. Only if they find the body. Coleman gestured to the mine. Plenty of deep shafts in there. You and your lover can spend eternity together in the dark. One of his men came running. Ryder coming! It's him! June's heart sank. Of course Caleb had come. Rosa must have seen them take her, must have run straight to him, and now he was riding into a trap because of her. Coleman positioned his men, 2 in the mine entrance, others behind cover. Remember, boys, let him get close. I want him to see her face when we gun him down. Caleb appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the sky, even from a distance. June could see he was alone. No backup, no posse. Just one man against 8. He rode down slowly, hands visible, rifle still in its scabbard, stopped just out of pistol range and dismounted. Coleman, he called. Let's talk terms. Nothing to talk about. Marshal, you've been dogging me for months. Time to pay the price. The girl's got nothing to do with this. Let her go, and we'll settle it between us. Coleman laughed. Oh, she's got everything to do with it? You think we don't know you've been sniffing around her skirts? Made you weak, Rourke. Made you stupid. Caleb took a step forward. I'm the one you want. Take me, but let her ride out. Come closer, and we'll discuss it. June watched Caleb approach, saw him scanning the area, cataloging positions. He had to know it was hopeless, had to see the men with guns trained on him. But still he came, steady and calm. When he was 30 feet away, Coleman showed himself, using June as a shield. That's close enough. Drop the guns. Caleb complied, unbuckling his gun belt and letting it fall. Now let her go. You really thought it would be that easy? Coleman pressed the knife to June's throat. Tell you what, Marshal, get on your knees. Beg for her life. Maybe I'll make it quick for her. June found her voice. Don't you dare, Caleb Rourke. Don't you dare kneel for me. His eyes met hers across the distance. In them, she saw love and sorrow and a terrible resolve. I'd kneel for you, June Walker. I'd do anything. How touching. Coleman's blade pressed harder, drawing a thin line of blood. On your knees, lawman. Caleb started to lower himself, and June's heart broke. This proud man, brought low because of her. She couldn't let it happen. Wouldn't. Her father had always said she was too much like her mother, too stubborn to know when she was beat. As Caleb's knee touched dirt, June proved him right. She snapped her head back hard, feeling Coleman's nose crunch. His grip loosened for just an instant, and she twisted, throwing herself sideways. Now, she screamed. Everything happened at once. Caleb rolled, coming up with a hidden pistol from his boot. His first shot took the man in the mine entrance. Coleman's men opened fire, but their shots went wild as their leader stumbled back, blood streaming from his broken nose. June hit the ground hard, still tied to the post but out of the direct line of fire. She watched Caleb move like deadly poetry, using every scrap of cover, every second of confusion. Another man fell, then another, but there were too many, and Caleb was exposed. She saw him take a bullet in the shoulder, spin with the impact, saw Coleman recover, raising his rifle. No! June fought against her bonds, rope tearing her wrists raw. Caleb! The shot was impossibly loud, but it was Coleman who fell, a red flower blooming on his chest. Behind him stood Thomas Walker. No, that was impossible. Her father was dead. She'd buried him herself. Not her father, Rosa's husband, Miguel, holding her father's old rifle. And behind him, half the town, Dolores with a scattergun, Buck and the Saloon girls, even some of the miners who'd worked with her father. They poured down the hillside like avenging angels, catching Coleman's remaining men in a crossfire. It was over in seconds. June sagged against the post, hardly believing. Strong hands cut her bonds. Sally, of all people, with tears streaming down her painted cheeks. "We couldn't let them take you," she said fiercely. "You're one of ours." June stumbled toward where Caleb lay propped against a rock, Dolores pressing cloth to his shoulder. His face was pale, but his eyes were alert, alive. "You came," she whispered, falling to her knees beside him. "Did you doubt it?" He raised his good hand to touch her face. "Though I had help I wasn't expecting. Rosa saw them take you," Dolores explained. "Came running to the saloon. We might not be respectable folk, but we take care of our own." Miguel knelt beside them. "Your father, Señorita. He saved my life once. Today, I return the favor." June looked around at the faces surrounding them. Outcasts and sinners, the ones the town looked down on. But they'd come when it mattered. They'd risked everything. "Thank you," she managed through tears. "All of you." "Save the speeches," Dolores said gruffly. "We need to get him to the doctor before he bleeds out." They improvised a travois, and the strange procession made its way back to town. June walked beside Caleb, holding his hand, no longer caring who saw or what they thought. The respectable folk came out to stare as they passed. Mrs. Morrison, Mrs. Blackwood, all the proper citizens who'd condemned her. But faced with the reality of what had nearly happened, faced with their Marshal's blood and a young woman's bruised face, their righteousness faltered. Dr. Morrison worked on Caleb without comment, extracting the bullet with steady hands, only when he was finished, Caleb resting peacefully under laudanum's influence. Did he speak? "My wife. She told me what happened yesterday, at the saloon." He washed his hands slowly. "I didn't. I should have." "It doesn't matter now," June said quietly. "No, it does." He met her eyes. "This town forgot what matters, got so caught up in appearances. We forgot about mercy, about looking after each other." He glanced at the room beyond, where saloon girls kept vigil alongside deputies. "Maybe it took folks like you to remind us." June stayed by Caleb's side as he healed. The town council met, debated, argued. There were some who wanted Coleman's death investigated, who muttered about vigilante justice. But louder voices prevailed, voices that pointed out the Marshal had been ambushed in the line of duty, that citizens had come to his aid. The stories that spread were interesting in their revisions. How June Walker had been kidnapped because she'd witnessed Coleman's crimes. How the Marshal had been protecting a witness, not pursuing anything improper. How the less respectable citizens had shown true civic courage. June knew better than to believe the town had truly changed. But something had shifted. The rigid lines between proper and improper had blurred, if only for a moment. And in that blurring, space had been created. Not much, but maybe enough. On the third night, Caleb woke clear-eyed and reached for her hand. "You are leaving," he said. "That morning." "You were packed." "Yes. But you're still here." June squeezed his fingers gently. "Someone has to make sure you don't do anything else foolishly heroic." "June." He struggled to sit up. "What happens now? The town might be grateful today, but tomorrow we face whatever comes," she said firmly. "Together, if you'll have me, not as your kept woman or your shame, but as whatever we can be in this place." "My wife," he said immediately, "if you'll marry a fool Marshal with more honor than sense." "Caleb, I know it won't be easy. Know there'll be talk and judgment and probably worse. But June, I meant what I said. You're worth everything to me. Let me try to be worth something to you." She leaned down and kissed him softly, tasting the promise in it. "You already are." Outside, Copper Hollow went about its evening business. The saloon's piano played, the church bells rang, and somewhere in between, two people who'd saved each other began to imagine a future neither had thought possible. It wouldn't be a fairy tale, but it would be theirs, built on truth and tested by fire, and in a hard land that broke most people. Sometimes that was the greatest victory of all, finding someone worth standing beside when the world tried to tear you apart. The morning stage left without June Walker aboard it. She had found At last, a reason to stay. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the shootout at the Garrison mine. June was tending Caleb's garden. He'd insisted she move into his house while he recovered. Propriety be damned. When young Timothy Morrison came running up the path. "Miss Walker, letter from the territorial governor." June's hands stilled on the tomato vines. She took the envelope with trembling fingers, noting the official seal. Inside the house, she could hear Caleb moving around, still slow but determined to be back on his feet. "What is it?" He appeared in the doorway, suspenders hanging loose, his arm still in a sling. She opened the letter and read aloud. "By order of the territorial government, investigation into the incident. Marshal Rourke exceeded his authority, acted without proper jurisdiction." Her voice faltered. "They're stripping you of your position." Caleb took the letter, scanning it with narrowed eyes. Coleman had friends in high places. "They can't prosecute me for his death, but they can do this." "Because of me." June sank onto the porch step. "If you hadn't come for me, I'd make the same choice again." He sat beside her, awkward with the sling. "Every time. What will you do now? Being Marshal is all you've wanted since Sarah died?" He was quiet for a moment. "Maybe it's time I wanted something else." Before June could respond, they heard commotion from town. Horses, wagons, raised voices. They exchanged glances and made their way down Main Street, where it seemed half of Copper Hollow had gathered outside the courthouse. Mayor Hutchins stood on the steps, red-faced and blustering. "Now, folks, I know you're upset, but the governor's decision is final." "The hell it is!" That was Dolores, magnificent in purple silk and righteous fury. Caleb Rourke saved this town from Coleman's gang. He acted outside the law, Hutchins insisted. Took justice into his own hands. He rescued a kidnapped woman. Buck's voice boomed over the crowd. "Since when is that illegal?" The crowd rumbled agreement. June was shocked to see not just the saloon folk, but shopkeepers, miners, even some of the church women who'd condemned her weeks ago. "Mrs." Morrison stepped forward. "Mayor Hutchins, I believe I speak for many when I say we've lost faith in your leadership. A man who'd punish our marshal for doing right isn't fit to lead. Now see here." "No, you see here." Dr. Morrison joined his wife. "This town has been dying by degrees. The mine's playing out. Young folks leaving. Nothing but suspicion and judgment keeping us company. Maybe it's time for a change." "What kind of change?" Hutchins demanded. "New leadership." It was Reverend Blackwood who spoke, surprising everyone. "I've done some soul-searching these past weeks. Watched how quick we were to cast stones, how slow to show mercy. Perhaps we need leaders who understand both justice and grace." The crowd parted as Caleb stepped forward, June at his side. Hutchins sneered. "Come to cause more trouble. Rourke, come to return this." Caleb unpinned his marshal's badge, set it on the steps. "You're right. I chose saving a life over following protocol. If that makes me unfit for the badge, so be it." He turned to go, but Dolores's voice stopped him. "Hold up there. Marshal, Mayor Hutchins, I call for a town vote. All in favor of keeping our current leadership, show hands." A scattering of hands rose. Hutchins' cronies, mostly. All in favor of new leadership. The sea of hands that rose made June's throat tight, even Mrs. Blackwood raised hers, not meeting June's eyes but standing firm. Hutchins sputtered. "You can't just—" "Actually," said Judge Whelan, who'd been watching quietly. "According to the town charter, emergency election can be called by citizen majority." He smiled thinly. "I suggest you start packing. Hutchins." What followed was chaos, but purposeful chaos. Within hours, a new election was organized. To June's amazement, the citizens elected Dr. Morrison as mayor, with Miguel, Rosa's husband, as his deputy. Their first official act was to offer Caleb his badge back. He looked at it for a long moment, then at June. "I need to think about it." That evening, they walked to the cemetery. Caleb laid flowers on a grave June had never visited, a simple stone marked Thomas Walker, her father's grave, properly tended. "You've been taking care of it," she said softly. Man deserved dignity in death, even if life denied it to him. He touched the stone gently. I've been thinking about what he said, about choosing between law and justice. Maybe sometimes they're not the same thing. So you won't take the badge back? He turned to her, and in the fading light, she could see him wrestling with the decision. Being Marshal gave me purpose after Sarah, kept me moving when all I wanted was to stop, but maybe it's time for a different purpose. What kind? Instead of answering, he knelt. June's breath caught as he pulled out a simple gold ring. The kind that involves building something instead of just keeping peace. Marry me, June. Not because it'll quiet the gossips or make us respectable, but because I can't imagine facing tomorrow without you. June looked at him, this good man who'd chosen her over everything, who'd walked through fire and judgment for her sake. I'm still the saloon girl. That won't change just because you're June Walker, he interrupted. Who saved a child in a bar fight? Who held her father's hand while he died? Who stood up to the whole town rather than bow her head? That's who I'm asking to marry me. She thought of her mother's letters, hidden sacrifices and love that endured past death. Thought of her father's last words about steel that bent but didn't break. Thought of all the reasons this was impossible, and the one reason it wasn't. That somewhere between that first night at the Silver Fang and this moment in a graveyard, she'd fallen completely in love with Caleb Rourke. Yes, she whispered. He slipped the ring on her finger with hands that shook slightly. When he stood and kissed her, she tasted promise and hope and a future she'd never dared imagine. They were married 3 days later. Not in the church. Reverend Blackwood wasn't quite that reformed. But in Dolores's saloon, with Judge Whelan officiating. June wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in the trunk her father had hidden. Caleb wore his best suit and a smile that transformed his weathered face. The whole town came, not because they had to, but because something had shifted in Copper Hollow. The rigid lines between respectable and not had blurred beyond recognition. Sally stood as June's bridesmaid, while Buck served as Caleb's best man. Rosa played the piano, and even Mrs. Morrison brought a cake. Never thought I'd see the day, Dolores murmured, dabbing at her eyes. Marshal marrying one of my girls in my own establishment. Former girl, June corrected. Then impulsively hugged the older woman. Thank you for everything. Bah! Dolores waved her off, but she was smiling. You just make him happy, you hear? Man's been walking around half dead for years. About time someone brought him back to life. The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional. But when Caleb promised to love, honor, and cherish, his voice carried the weight of a man who'd already proved those words in blood. And when June promised to stand by him in sickness and health, she meant through gunfights and gossip and whatever else this hard land might throw at them. By the power vested in me, Judge Whelan intoned, I now pronounce you man and wife. The cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next county. Someone started the piano again, and suddenly the saloon was transformed into a celebration that would be talked about for years. As the evening wore on, Caleb finally made his announcement. He'd take the badge back, but with conditions. He wanted deputies, real ones, not just whoever could hold a gun. He wanted the town council to include representatives from all parts of Copper Hollow, not just the wealthy merchants. And, he added, his arm around June, I want it clear that any citizen of this town, regardless of their past or their profession, has equal protection under the law. Here, here, someone shouted, and glasses raised throughout the room. Later, as the party continued. June and Caleb slipped out to the porch. The night was clear. Stars scattered like spilled silver across the sky. No regrets? He asked softly. She turned in his arms, marveling at the simple right to do so openly. Only one, his brow furrowed. What? That my parents couldn't see this, couldn't know that their daughter found her way after all. I think they know. He tilted her chin up gently. Your mother's courage, your father's stubbornness, they live on in you. They'd be proud. Of the Marshal's wife. Of June Rourke, he corrected. who she was, who she is, who she'll become. They stood there in the starlight, listening to the music and laughter spilling from the saloon. Tomorrow would bring challenges. There would still be those who whispered, who judged, who couldn't forget what June had been. Caleb would face his own battles, trying to enforce law in a town learning to balance justice with mercy. But tonight, they had this: a new name, a new chance, a new story to write together. June thought of the morning she'd first walked into the Silver Fang, desperate and proud and certain her life was over. How strange that in losing everything, she'd found more than she'd ever dared hope for. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked. "That sometimes," she said slowly. "The ending is just the beginning." He smiled and drew her back inside, where their friends, the outcasts and sinners who'd become family, waited to celebrate love's unlikely victory. June Rourke, Nee Walker, former saloon girl and current Marshal's wife, danced with her husband while the town that had once condemned her raised glasses in her honor. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It was infinitely better, and in the harsh beauty of the American frontier, where second chances were as rare as rain and drought. That was nothing short of a miracle. The band played on, and Copper Hollow, that dying town of broken dreams and stubborn hope, found new life in the union of two souls who'd chosen love over law, mercy over judgment, and each other over everything else. 5 years had passed since June Walker became June Rourke in Dolores's saloon. The morning sun painted their farmhouse in shades of gold as June stood in the doorway, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching Caleb teach their son to ride. "Keep your back straight, Thomas," Caleb called to the 4-year-old perched atop a gentle mare. "That's it. You're a natural. Just like your mama." Little Thomas Walker Rourke, named for both grandfathers, had his father's steady gray eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. He guided the horse in a slow circle, face bright with concentration and joy. "Mama, look," he called. "I'm riding." "I see, sweetheart," June called back, her heart full. "You're doing wonderfully." The farm sprawled before them, 20 acres of good land at the edge of what used to be Copper Hollow. The town had a new name now: Hope Springs, voted on by the citizens after the discovery of a freshwater spring that promised new life for the failing community. With the mines played out, folks had turned to farming, ranching, and the steady trickle of settlers heading further west who needed supplies and rest. Caleb had kept his badge for 2 years after their wedding, long enough to train Miguel and 2 other deputies, long enough to see law and order take firm root. Then he'd hung it up for good, choosing family over duty. They'd bought the land with their savings and a loan from the newly established Hope Springs Bank, run, ironically enough, by Mrs. Morrison, who'd discovered a head for figures after her husband's death from pneumonia. June heard a wagon approaching and shaded her eyes. Rosa climbed down, basket in hand, followed by her own children. "Morning, Senora Marshal," Rosa teased, using the old title that had become a term of endearment. "Brought fresh bread and news from town." They settled on the porch, watching the children play while Caleb tended the horses. It was a ritual, these visits, maintaining the bonds forged in harder times. "What news?" June asked, pouring lemonade. "Another family arrived yesterday. The Changs, from California. Dr. Morrison, the younger one, the old doctor's nephew, says Mr. Chang knows medicines. Chinese ones. Might open an apothecary." June smiled. Hope Springs had become something unique in the territory, a place where anyone could start fresh. Former saloon girls had become shopkeepers, Mexican families owned businesses, and now Chinese immigrants were welcomed, not without some grumbling from old-timers. But the town council, still headed by the younger Dr. Morrison, held firm. "And," Rosa continued with a sly smile, "Sally's engaged to the new school teacher, if you can believe it." "Mr. Garrett?" June laughed. She swore she'd never marry a man who owned more books than guns. "Love makes fools of us all." Rosa's expression grew serious. "There's other news. Dolores is sick, really sick this time. June's happy mood dimmed. Dolores had been fighting a cough for months, refusing to slow down, refusing to admit weakness. How bad? She's asking for you. Within an hour, June was dressed and in the wagon, Caleb driving while Thomas napped in the back. They'd made this trip many times, but today it felt different. Final. The Silver Fang still stood on Main Street, though it was a tamer establishment now. Buck ran it with a firm but fair hand, and the upstairs rooms had been converted to boarding house accommodations for traveling families. The real money came from the restaurant Rosa's cousin operated out of the old kitchen. They found Dolores in a room above the saloon, propped against pillows, her face gaunt but her eyes still sharp. "There's my girl," she wheezed as June entered, looking proper as a preacher's wife. "Hardly that proper," June said, taking her hand. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've got a date with the devil and I'm running late." Dolores coughed, a harsh sound. "But I needed to see you first. Got something for you." She gestured to a wooden box on the nightstand. Inside, June found papers, the deed to the Silver Fang. "Dolores, no." "Hush. Buck's got no head for business, and you know it. Place needs someone with sense running it." She squeezed June's hand with surprising strength. "You came here with nothing but pride and desperation. You walked through hell and came out the other side. This place, it saved you, in its way. Maybe you can save it back. I don't know anything about running a saloon. You know about surviving, about giving people second chances." Dolores's eyes moved to Thomas, peeking around his father's leg. "Besides, it won't be a saloon much longer. Will it? Times are changing. Make it into something new, something that boy won't have to be ashamed of." June felt tears burning. "You talk like you're dying." "We're all dying, honey. I'm just ahead of schedule." Dolores reached out to touch Thomas's hair as he crept closer. "You got your mama's courage, boy." Thomas nodded solemnly. "Papa says Mama's the bravest person in the whole territory." "Your papa's right." Dolores smiled. "You remember that. Remember where you came from. But don't let it chain you. Your mama taught this whole town that lesson." She died 3 days later, peaceful in the end, with June holding one hand and Sally the other. Half the town turned out for the funeral, former customers and working girls, merchants and farmers, all united in mourning a woman who'd been more than she seemed. Reverend Blackwood, now gray-haired and genuinely reformed, spoke of redemption and grace. "Dolores Flynn took in the lost and the broken," he said. "She gave them shelter when the righteous turned away. If that's not God's work, I don't know what is." June stood with her family as they lowered the coffin. Caleb's arm was strong around her. Thomas clutched her hand, and the new baby kicked inside her as if sensing the importance of the moment. After the service, June walked through the Silver Fang one more time. The stage where Sally had danced now held a piano where children took lessons. The bar where desperate men had drunk away their sorrows now served coffee and Rosa's famous Mexican hot chocolate. The rooms that had housed secrets now sheltered traveling families. "What will you do with it?" Caleb asked. Joining her, June thought of Dolores's words, of transformation and second chances. Make it into something new, a hotel, maybe, or a meeting hall, somewhere people can gather without shame. The town could use that. The town could use a lot of things. June turned to face him. "I want to run for town council." Caleb's eyebrows rose. "That's ambitious. A former saloon girl on the council? They'll talk. Let them." June's hand went to her belly. "I want our children to grow up in a place where your past doesn't define your future, where anyone can become anything." He kissed her forehead. "Then you'll have my vote, and I suspect many others." 6 months later, June Walker Rourke was elected to the Hope Springs Town Council, the first woman to serve. The Silver Fang became the Haven, a hotel and community center where town meetings were held, where couples married, where children learned to read in the library June established in the old card room. Years passed. The town grew. The railroad came through, bringing prosperity and challenges. June served 3 terms on the council. helping to draft laws that made Hope Springs a beacon of progressiveness in the territory. Women could own property, minorities could vote in local elections, and any child could attend the public school regardless of their parents' occupation or origin. Thomas grew tall and strong, with his father's sense of justice and his mother's compassion. His sister, Sarah, named for the love Caleb had lost, had June's green eyes and stubborn streak. They played with the Chang children, learned Spanish from Rosa's family, and grew up in a world their parents had fought to create. On quiet evenings, June and Caleb would sit on their porch, watching the sun set over their fields. His hair was more silver than brown now, and lines mapped the joys and sorrows of their years together. But his hand in hers was still steady, still sure. "Any regrets?" he'd ask sometimes, echoing that long-ago night. "Only that it took so long to find you," she'd answer. They never spoke of the dark days much, the humiliation, the violence, the despair that had brought them together. But sometimes June would find Caleb in his study, holding the Marshal's badge he'd worn the night Coleman's men took her. And sometimes he'd find her reading her mother's letters, tears on her cheeks for all the might-have-beens. But mostly, they lived, they loved, they built something lasting in a land that consumed the weak and broke the proud. They raised children who knew their worth wasn't determined by their birth or their mistakes, but by their choices and their courage. When journalists came to write about Hope Springs, the miracle town that welcomed everyone, they always wanted to interview the former Marshal and his wife. June would serve them tea in what used to be the Silver Fang's main room, now bright with windows and children's artwork. "How did you do it?" they'd ask. "How did you change an entire town's heart?" June would smile, thinking of Dolores and Rosa, of Sally and Buck, and all the others who'd stood by her when the world tried to tear her down. "We didn't change it," she'd say. "We just reminded folks what it was supposed to be all along." And in the evening, when the journalists had gone and the children were asleep, June and Caleb would stand together in their doorway, looking out at the lights of Hope Springs, a town built on second chances, where love had conquered law and mercy had triumphed over judgment. "Look what we made," June would whisper. "Look what you made," Caleb would correct, pulling her close. "I just tried to keep up." She'd laugh, the sound carrying across the fields where their crops grew tall and strong. June Walker Rourke, daughter of a drunk, former saloon girl, wife, mother, councilwoman, keeper of the haven, had written her own story after all. Not the one she'd imagined as a desperate young woman mopping floors, but something infinitely richer. And in the annals of Hope Springs, when children asked how their town became special, old-timers would tell them about the Marshal who chose love over law, the saloon girl who chose dignity over despair, and the day a whole town decided that maybe, just maybe, people were more than their worst moments. It wasn't just a love story, though love was at its heart. It was a resurrection story of two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other, of a dying town that chose rebirth over decay, of the American dream, rewritten to include everyone brave enough to claim it. And somewhere in the great beyond, Thomas Walker and Sarah Richmond and Dolores Flynn looked down on what their sacrifice and sorrow had made possible, and found it good. The sun set on Hope Springs, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise, and in a farmhouse at the edge of town, June and Caleb Rourke held each other close, still choosing love over everything else, still proving that sometimes the best endings are just beginnings in disguise. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I hope June and Caleb's story touched your heart as it did mine. Where are you enjoying this story right now? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about June and Caleb's journey. What did you think of their love story? Your comments mean everything to us. Until next time, partners.